You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Kathy B.Sc.
Welcome to the Health Hub on Radio Maria Canada, exploring cutting-edge health and wellness information and therapies, helping you to take your health to the next level. I'm your host, Kathy B.Sc, and I'm an holistic nutritionist and a professional cancer coach. Hair loss isn't just about vanity. It's a window into what's happening beneath the surface. And today we're diving into the fascinating world where science, scalp health, and the microbiome meet beauty and well-being. And my guest today is Dr. Andrea Echeverry. And in this episode, we will speak to what really drives hair loss, how the microbiome and immune system influence the follicle, and why restoring balance, not just applying treatments, is key to long-term hair and scalp health. Dr. Andrea is a biologist with a Ph.D. in Microbiology and Immunology from the University of Miami and a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology and Biotechnology from Florida Atlantic University. After pioneering neonatal mouse models for intestinal infection research, she shifted her focus to the intersection of the gut, skin, and scalp microbiome, especially its role in chronic inflammation and hair loss. For over 14 years, Dr. Andrea has collaborated with barbers, dermatologists, and hair transplant surgeons across Florida, Georgia, and Puerto Rico to highlight the microbiome's vital role in scalp and hair health. Combining trichology, microbiology, ecology, and micropigmentation, she helps clients restore both hair and confidence. A passionate educator and advocate, she promotes hair loss prevention among young adults and is producing a bilingual web series sharing real hair loss journeys. Dr. Echeverry also serves as the executive and educational boards of the Association of Professional Trichologists, where she is the immediate past president and treasurer. If you have ever wondered why your hair is thinning, what your scalp is trying to tell you, or build a routine that truly supports regeneration from the inside out, this conversation will give you the scientific insight and some actionable steps that you have been waiting for. We will be right back to start our conversation with Dr. Andrea.
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy B.Sc.
Welcome back to the Health Hub. Please do follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, X, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on those locations. Dr. Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so happy to have you. It's going to be enlightening. And, I get a lot of suggestions for guests, but I hunted you down. I really felt that this was something we haven't talked about, the hair, the scalp, but I do see it all over the place now. So I think it's really going to be a good conversation. You can help us through the weeds, let us know what is good, bad, or otherwise. But before we get into all of that, because it's so fascinating, I want to make sure that everybody knows, we've done a little bit of an introduction, but how did you go from what you were doing previously? How did you transition into this area of the scalp and the microbiome and all that you do now?
Well, it's a long story, but I'll try to make it as short as possible. So I started my career, in my 20s with an interest in biology. And since I was a little girl, that was everything that I read, everything that I watched. I was that person that wasn't afraid of animals and insects and things like this. I was always fascinated by the living world. And then in college, I found a fantastic female mentor who was a microbiologist from MIT in Florida at a public college that I was going to. And she had some very interesting and well-funded projects by the EPA and the Department of Defense on environmental microbes and potential bioterrorism. And so that was my focus. I was fascinated by it. And the fact that we had the facilities to be able to do the research, just showed me a side of academia that I was very excited about. I didn't have to go to, Yale or Princeton or Harvard to be able to have access to these tools. And so I basically was for many years an environmental microbiologist. I work with seawater, with the beach, with fomites, which basically means anything that a human comes in contact with, which means that those surfaces also become either contaminated or colonized by microbes. And after 4 years, I realized, well, how do we transition from this very interesting basic work to something that is more beneficial for human disease? And so I decided to get a PhD in microbiology and immunology at the University of Miami. At that time, the microbiology department had one of the strongest pathogen research consortia, I will call it, one of the few in the world. And so I decided to switch to mouse research, which was, very different and very difficult in the beginning. But I had two fantastic mentors who are still great friends after, 20 years. And so I spent 8 years in academia being able to bring to fruition the first animal model of neonatal infection with a human pathogen. And I bring that up because it's important for people to know that, unfortunately, we cannot jump directly to doing experiments like what we did in the mice in humans. We needed to be able to have some indications, right, that there was a potential human use for some of the knowledge that we were acquiring. And we actually did. The model did resemble Crohn's and colitis. And it was the only animal model where the mice would not die. So we were actually able to investigate every single aspect of gut, intestinal inflammation, and what we call adaptive immunity, which is if you encounter a pathogen, how does the gut handle that to be able to mount a proper immune response so that we can not die from diarrhea and a gastrointestinal infection. And so, after close to 15 years in the field, unfortunately, I found that, well, first, female scientists were not really supported. Second, the funding agencies were shifting some of their efforts to be able to go directly into human research, and they were not really supporting animal models. And unfortunately, the transition would have been for me to start working with non-human primate models. And at that point, I realized that I was really not ready for that. And I had a PhD. I did not become an MD. That would have taken, a few additional years. And I just realized, I don't think this is the right path for me to follow. I have found holes in the literature, right, and things that we don't really know about. And even though I was in gut, microbiome, and immunity research, I realized that a lot of the projects where the money was going were just not going to be answering the questions. They were not asking the right questions, and they were not using the right methodology. What does that mean? Unfortunately, a lot of the gut microbiome research that was being done and what has been done for the last 20 years was very descriptive. What we wanted to know is what is there, right? So we spent a lot of time. There's been a lot of money thrown at the issue of what species are there, where are they localized? And unfortunately, that's not how microbes work. I am, in principle, a microbial ecologist. And so the effort should have always been, how do all these microbes interact in the tissue as it is, and how does it influence whole body health? And so I realized that there was, and I can say this, it really truly is amazing after being in the field for so long. It's only been in the last 5 years that the focus on skin and scalp microbiome has been more guided. But 20 years ago, I could see that we were going to get lost in the weeds, on gut microbiome. And I figured, well, maybe this is a time for me to pause. And so I, started a different business. It just gave me a lot of knowledge on how to run a business, how to deal with clients, social media, advertising, budgeting, that kind of thing. And then after 3 years, I switched to I became a cosmetic tattooist. So I became a scalp micropigmentation artist. I was one of the first in the world to learn how to tattoo or micro tattoo a completely bald person. And that was, I was not a dermatologist. I had never been a tattooist. I had never like really looked into permanent makeup for myself. This was a completely new field. So since I was one of the first in the world, there were really no good educational platforms for that. So I had to invent and learn a lot on my own. Basically, I'm self-taught, and that's been my career for 14 years. But since I started so early, what happened, and since I had my Ph.D., a lot of people were coming to me with really difficult skin and scalp conditions. And unfortunately, what I found is that a lot of the tools, cosmetic tools and some of the over-the-counter drugs that were available were just not cutting it. I was not able to really um, finish some of the cases because the scalp itself, even in the absence of hair, with this bald, really, and sometimes very young guys, unfortunately, was very difficult to keep the pigment. There was a lot of excess exfoliation. There was a lot of oiliness that was happening as I was doing the tattoo. And you have to understand, some of these people, the surface area of the scalp is huge. And so to be able to recreate a front line with micro points and using pointillism, where you're layering over time thousands and thousands of points, well, requires dozens of hours. Every session would be 5 to 6 hours.
Oh, wow.
And sometimes, I would finish a session and I would not see a major change. And I realized, like, I'm going to have to use my skills as a microbiologist to be able to figure this out. So I started using, microscopy to be able to look at things, because unfortunately the eye, it doesn't capture everything that's happening in the microbial world, right? Or in a microscopic scale. And so that's basically where I started, using some of my clients as testing subjects. And I realized that a lot of people were so excited when I was able to show them. They would come with like um, folliculitis, right? Inflammation of the follicle, or pimples, blackheads. They were having miniaturized hair, where I was looking at the scalp and I'm like, where am I going to put this needle where all I see is little tiny hairs? And we're looking under the microscope and realizing, like, yes, you may have lost the terminal long hair, but every single follicle is still alive. And so I had to pause, right? And I was like, well, I'm in a business. I still have to be able to make a living and keep the business going and go in the right direction. But at the same time, as a scientist, I realized that I had the perfect platform to be able to ask and answer some questions about the scalp that nobody knew about.
Well, the scalp and the scalp microbiome, I mean, you were a pioneer, I would assume, 20 years
Yes,
ago in the area of the gut microbiome.
yes,
And so by necessity, I guess that type of research had to start with identifying species and this and that, and not getting to the meat and potatoes at the very onset of it. But since then, and since the inception of all of these research studies, with the understanding now that we don't have just microbiome in the gut, it's all over our body and surfaces. One of the last bastions is the scalp, right? Like it's
yes.
just and I've just started hearing about scalp health and scalp technologies. So I think it's just a fascinating area for you to have transitioned into. Now, you are, say the right name for me, a trichologist?
Well, I am a practitioner of trichology. I want to make that
Okay.
distinction because many times, in other podcasts and interviews, I get labeled as a trichologist. Unfortunately, I am not a certified trichologist, meaning that I haven't done formal education as some certified trichologists have. But again, going into some of the cases that I was seeing with people who I'm telling them, like, listen, I know you want the tattoo, you're feeling depressed, you just got divorced, you want to look your best, but I think that we can regrow your hair. And so, 10 years ago, if I've been in the scalp micropigmentation field for 14 years, it took me about 3 years to realize, like, wait, what the hell is trichology? I'm sorry,
Mm,
what is trichology? And that's when I realized that it had been in existence for over 100 years at that point.
I've never
I
heard of it.
hadn't, me neither. And I even had to go back to some of my immunology books to go, wait a second. So these people, trichologists, are the ones who specialize in the science of hair follicle science.
Hmm.
And even though I was in gut microbiome, a lot of the researchers that, in presentations that I got exposed to during graduate school had to do with skin biopsy transplantation. And they were looking at hair, really at what happens within the skin and the hair follicle, but not studying that. They were studying how can a transplanted piece of or patch of hair that has a skin that has little hairs on it survive and not be rejected. And that's when I started, putting the points together in my head and going, I never learned anything about the hair follicle. And once you go down that rabbit hole, it just opens up. I mean, it's an amazing world. And so one of the things that most people don't know is that the hair follicle, every single hair follicle is an independent organ. Can you imagine that, right? So we have like a liver, we have two lungs, we have one heart, but we have thousands, if not millions, of tiny little organs organized spatially on the skin and the scalp and pretty much every single area, including, close to the mucosa. Like if you look at the pubis, for example, right? So we have hair there, a lot of hair, very close to the mucosa, but we don't have hair once we look directly into the gut.
Hmm.
And right. And so we have eyebrows, we have eyelashes, we have hair within the ear. We do not have hair follicles really surrounding the lips, which is actually to me very interesting because when you start looking at the areas where a lot of people have issues, then we identify that in some areas, right, for example, the scalp, well, it's an area that has a lot of oil production. We have this really thick fiber that is formed, but then you go into the forehead, right, and it gets a little bit oily. But when you look with a microscope, every single area is covered when it's healthy. It's covered with little hairs. You can actually see the hair. You don't see the follicle because the follicle is millimeters within the skin. So of course we're not going to be cutting through the tissue. We can only look from the outside. And then you go into the eyebrow or you go in between what we call, so the glabella is the area right where a lot of the research that we know comes from, is the area on the forehead right between the eyebrows. And then if you look at the hair in between the two eyebrows, right, sometimes you can feel that there's something there, but it doesn't form a longer hair like we have in the eyebrow. And then we have eyelashes. Every single one of these little hairs and follicles are communicating the way that they should so that the skin stays in balance. And when you look with a microscope, it really is truly fascinating. It is like looking at a forest. And so unfortunately, I had to be careful in the beginning because some people would freak out when they looked on a larger screen. It's like, oh, I get a little itchy here. And I'm looking with the microscope and I'm seeing inflammation, redness, breakage of the surface, this large flake. Sometimes you would see little bumps and little things. And so some people will freak out and some people will be fascinated by it. And as a microbiologist, I was in love and I was hooked
Wow.
for life.
Can you create more hair follicles? Just I mean, the whole idea of I never even considered that the hair grows. I mean, I see obviously that hair grows different in different places. Never thought to ask why. Never, just
Correct.
never entered my mind. But when it comes to regenerating hair on the scalp, Can you create more follicles, or are we born with follicles and that's it? We just have to do our best with them.
Yes, exactly. We are born with the number of follicles that we're going to have. So
So some people are
there is
blessed with a lot of hair and some people aren't.
some, yes, and that's of course there's a combination of genetic factors, environmental factors that will determine that. Because if you pay attention to a child, right, when they're born, and they just come out of the womb, well, they're going to need a certain amount of time for this follicles to become activated to a different environment. And so there's a transitional point, and that normally takes about 2 years. And, if you look at a child's hair, for example, where they're not going to have like the hair that they're going to have as an adult when they're 3 years old, and then 5 years old, and then when they become preteen. So there's a long developmental time for the hair itself, the hair fiber to come out. But that the hair follicle needs some level of training, which is given by cues of their genetics, their nutrition, the cosmetic products that they are, their environment. Are these people able to connect with nature, right? With animals? We have this interactive, in all these interactive mechanisms. And then cosmetic products. What are the things that we're putting on the surface from the time that we're born that could potentially lead to the full potential of the hair follicle that the person has when they were born to fully express? So
Now,
that is the reason.
is hair, sorry to interrupt you, just something popped into my mind. Would you consider hair as receptors, or are they protectors, or are they both?
They're everything. Yes,
Okay.
it's truly fascinating. It is so the hair itself, it's part of a separate system. So we have the skin, and basically the hair is like an extension. And yes, we have fascinating data, really strong data, showing, this came about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more, that the hair and the hair follicle actually is connected to the olfactory system, and it responds to different molecules, and you can actually enhance the production of final hair through that connection with the hair follicle and the olfactory system. And think about it. This is why it's so interesting that you know so much about this, and the right questions are coming right now. Because one of the problems that we have in the modern world, so in the industrialized world, is allergies and asthma, right? And we have that connection. We know that people are having not only gastrointestinal allergies, but they're also having environmental allergies that are coming through the nose. It's affected the sinus, a lot of middle ear infections, right? We have like all of these things going on in an area right on the face. So if you think of the nose and the sinus, if you look at a 3D image of the human body, well, all of these areas are going to be exposed to allergens. They're going to be exposed to some microbes. They're going to be an immune response. And these areas are underneath all this inflammation, or what we call, a chronic low-level inflammation, is underneath, perhaps, half a centimeter underneath where the skin and the hair follicles are. And so we're a whole system. Everything is interconnected. So if there's inflammation of the nasal passages, of the eye, there's going to be irritation, of course, and we're going to be able to see those signs outwardly. And so sometimes the first indications that there's something going on is going to be displayed on the skin, because it's responding to an immune response that's happening deeper into the mucosal and the underlying tissues.
And so there is the connection right there between the gut and the scalp.
Yes. And imagine the gut it has such a large surface area, right? It's its own universe. There are so many things that are happening. And unfortunately, we live in a world, right? If you live in a large a city, you're going to be exposed to things that are completely different than you would if you lived in a farm. And so clearly, right, what happens in a farm or in the forest is going to be very different than what happens if you lived in Japan, right? Or like Tokyo, for example. There are some cities in the world where the rate of sensitive skin syndrome has skyrocketed. The rates of eczema, psoriasis, and generalized allergies and sensitivity are through the roof. And so people are very busy. I mean, you live in a large city because perhaps you're going to have a very busy job. You're going to be able to have, right, multiple children. You perhaps have some issues, and then your children are going to be, unfortunately, the ones that are going to be affected the most by you living in a large city that has chemicals. It has the smog, the lack of nature, the lack of trees, the lack of contact with nature. And so it is a huge problem, which is, now this has become a focal point for me. It's actually funny because in immunology, I was working in gastrointestinal health, and there was so much research being done in animals on atopic dermatitis. And for me, I'm like, what on earth is atopic dermatitis? Even then, as an immunologist, I was like, this is eczema. I had never met anyone that had eczema because I was born and raised in Colombia. We don't talk about psoriasis, these kinds of issues. I never encountered it until I was in research, and then many decades later, when I was dealing with clients that they're coming in, and I'm going like, I had never seen anything like this, and so I didn't have that personal experience because I was born in a small city. I was spending 2 months or 3 months out of the year at my grandparents' farm. It was a coffee farm, and they had pigs, and so I was in contact with all of these things. That was my experience, and I never had acne. I never encountered any hair loss, or what I thought was hair loss. Of course, now being in the field, I realized I did have a few issues. I just didn't know that they were issues, that they were just normal for me. So you can imagine that, yes, if somebody starts their life off on the wrong foot, where they're going to have a lot of generalized itch and flakiness and redness and sensitivity, and they're going to be in pain. And that itch scratch cycle, right, when you have a skin issue, is terrible. It doesn't let either the parents or the children sleep. And we know for a fact that atopic dermatitis, slash eczema, and the other associated skin conditions and immune issues lead to the person potentially not achieving their final potential. Because if you don't sleep, you're not going to be able to learn. You won't be able to really focus when you go to school, right? Mm-hmm. And this is going to be day in and day out. And so imagine if a family, right, where they have perhaps a family history of some of these immune issues, then they have additional members in their family. You're going to be looking at a nucleus of between 3 to 5, maybe 6 people in a household, every single one of them struggling either with the same issue or similar issues. And so those are basically the people that I serve and the people that I work with.
Well, it's fascinating that the topic of healthcare, scalp care, it is, again, leading back to something that we're always talking about. It's a systemic thing. It's aging for sure. It's this, that, and the other, but it's a systemic health issue. And it's really new. It's really new, this conversation on scale, at least for the general population.
Yes.
And I think it's a fascinating area of work. We're going to take just a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to continue on with this. We're going to find out some of the treatments that can be used to stimulate hair growth, I guess you would say, by trichologists. But also we're going to talk about how our system and taking care of our internal being can help with our hair growth and our skin health, of course. So we'll be back in just a couple of minutes, everybody.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, email thh@radiomaria.ca. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back, everybody. All right, Dr. Andrea, let's talk about just what I said at the end of the first segment. What are, let's start with maybe external or not the systemic care right at the top of this half. Let's start off with some of the treatments that are out there that you are using and others are using to stimulate scalp health and hair health.
Of course. So what the public needs to know is that since the field of trichology, has been around for so long, in principle, trichologists are the ones who, depending on their background, may be able to really help. And so there are at this point dozens of different technologies that have come out, over the years. If you think about it, the separation between a dermatologist and a trichologist may be on the types of topical products that they use, where dermatologists may focus, because that is their expertise, on medications and pharmaceuticals, while a trichologist and practitioner of trichology may start using skin and scalp products and technologies that our dermatologists now going to use, because they're going to start going more into the cosmetic component. So we have, as part of a new initiative called the Association of Professional Trichologists that I've been a part of from the inception. We are a nonprofit, and our aim is to be able to grow and be able to bring to the public the right connections with the right practitioners who are able to help them. And so, I'll make a parenthesis on this and just let people know that a lot of the trichologists that we have as part of our nonprofit come from either a cosmetologist background or a hairstyling background. And so they can now, with their knowledge, right, some of these women and men have 20 to 25 years of experience, where they can actually help improve the scalp, which is the soil, and then be able to style or improve the hair, which are like the trees and the flowers. But many of them are able to work with either dermatologists or functional doctors. And so there's a lot of different techniques that can be used in order to be able to help people be able to grow really beautiful hair. But the focus should always be first on the scalp. Mm-hmm. If there is a scalp issue where you have redness, inflammation, flakiness, pain, sensitivity, hair shedding, the first thing that I want people to know is that even though you are going to find a lot of advertising out there on, for example, self-microneedling, right? People can go on Amazon and they can get a derma roller or a microneedling device. Well, that might not be the right thing for you to do at home. You can actually make a lot more damage. Think about it. If we have an entire community of microbes, some of them are driving some of this inflammatory process, and you're piercing through the scalp and actually opening the way for some of these microbes to penetrate further, maybe you're going to be causing some damage. And so we definitely want to be able to work with a professional. There are very few products in the market that should be used by somebody who has an extreme skin or scalp issue.
What about like shampoos and things like that?
No, well, there are. So shampoos, conditioners, scalp treatments are to be used at home. Mm-hmm. But for the person to determine what is the right product that they need to use, it is always best to consult with someone. Unfortunately, we are in a world where social media and health influencers who have no knowledge and no background, unfortunately, all of these things are being driven by a financial interest. A lot of them are not evidence-based. And it makes people lose so much time. For example, we had this whole thing on rosemary oil that went on, I don't know, for like 2 years. And unfortunately, there is absolutely no research on rosemary oil. And where a lot of the social influencers were, the paper that they were looking at, they are not able to really assess, am I looking at the right thing? And so we know that, for example, dermatologists, when they started seeing this trend of people being recommended, don't use minoxidil, use rosemary oil. When unfortunately, rosemary oil can actually cause a lot of issues for some people. It can be very irritating. Tea tree oil is the other one. You cannot use tea tree oil on its own. It needs to be within a carrier. It needs to be diluted. It needs to be within a formulation. And so there are a lot of cosmetic formulators and scientists and dermatologists that, thank goodness, had ample social media platforms, and they started raising, the red flags, like, do not believe everything that you see on social media. Yes, a product may work on 10% or 15% of the population, but it's not going to work on 100% of the population. And you may fall within that category of people who needs a little bit of assistance. One of the techniques that I do like a lot, but unfortunately, it's in the beginning when it first came out, it was extremely expensive for a clinic or a practitioner to have. So, cosmetologists and estheticians had access to this. It goes by the brand name of HydraFacial. So HydraFacial,
right, yep.
You've heard about it probably.
Yes, I'm going for one this afternoon.
I can't believe it, but I do believe it. I actually love the HydraFacial type technology. So I'll explain really quickly. But it's basically like a micro pressure cleaner with a vacuum. That is such a powerful way of cleaning the scalp and making room to be able to have a cosmetic product sit on the scalp and then have some of the actives penetrate just enough to do what they need to do. It's extremely difficult to clean the scalp at home with shampooing. I have spent the last 10 years trying to figure out why is it that when you give a recommendation of a shampoo, the person doesn't see the effect? And so it led me into this very weird road of befriending people. I've had romantic partners who are losing hair. And so, I go into the bathroom with them. I'm like, show me how it is that you're doing this. And when I realized how they wash their hair, I was like, oh, no wonder they don't see any changes. And they're seeing that their hair fiber is getting dry and brittle. And actually the itchiness gets worse because the product never goes directly on the scalp. And then they're washing with water that is so contaminated. They don't have a water filter in place. They're not aware of microplastics. And so they might be using a product that is formulated poorly, is leaving some debris behind, and then they're trying to wash that off with something that is not pH correctly, is full of microplastics, the water filter, even if they have one, or it's very hard water. Unfortunately, we have that problem now. And so how do you expect that a product that's going to leave some debris behind is going to be cleansed off with something that also brings additional minerals and things on it? And so it's very difficult for people to resolve issues at home. I definitely recommend for people to connect with either a dermatologist who follows principles of trichology or has a trichologist at their office. That does happen because the dermatologist will have only 5 to 10 minutes at the most. Some will spend maybe 15 minutes. But then to be able to do the rest of the process, the person may need to have some treatments that will last 15, 20, 30, an hour and a half, right, until things are more settled. And then you can use all of these products. Sometimes, you do need to tackle the problem right away and use a pharmaceutical medication. Well, we have genetic testing now to be able to figure out, will this person respond to a medication versus not, right? A lot of people go to a clinic saying, oh, I've been using minoxidil and it didn't work for me. Well, it might be because genetically you're not predisposed to being able to modify the molecule into the bioactive compound. No wonder it didn't work for you. It doesn't mean that the medication didn't work. It's just that you're not the optimal candidate for it.
Yeah.
Correct.
What about treatments like PRP and laser? Do you find those to be of value?
Yes, I have used and actually have some old content on using red light therapy of different kinds, right? There's like lasers and then there's just the red light frequency, and there's a combination of both. That is one of the most powerful ways to reactivate the mitochondria. All right. So the mitochondria is the energy powerhouse of every cell. It does work extremely well. It can be used to minimize inflammation, improve blood flow. So it is one of the things that we do recommend. The problem is that when you, for example, find a helmet, right, and you have a lot of hair, well, you need to be able to like part the hair to be able to have the light go through. So that technology is definitely much more advantageous for people who are more advanced in their hair loss stage or they have been struggling with a skin condition. They do benefit because there's more space available for the light to do their thing. It might not work as well for somebody who has a lot of hair, for example, menopausal women, right, where there's a hormonal change and they start shedding hair and the hair gets a little bit thinner, but they still have a lot of hair. It's just that they notice that the ponytail is not as thick. It may still work, but you need to make sure that the light actually hits the scalp so that the cells within the scalp respond to it. If the red light is just sitting on the hair, it may not do much.
So those gadgets that you buy on Amazon that massage and come with red light, they're, in your estimation, probably not doing a lot?
Well, I am in the process of continue to test one of these devices. The problem is that red light therapy doesn't really penetrate as deep as some people need it to be. The frequency itself,
Fair. Okay.
right? It's a vibration, so it doesn't really penetrate as deep, especially if there is, a thick layer of dying microbes and skin cells that are dying off and need to be removed in order to penetrate. And so I'm testing one of them. Unfortunately, it's not really low level laser therapy. It's just a red light. And so we just don't have all of these technologies available. Thank goodness in Asia, they are focusing a lot on these things because, if you live in a very large city, you're not going to spend an hour and a half going to a clinic or 2 hours, right, to go to a clinic. And so they are the pioneers in some of this technology. And so, I keep my thumb on the pulse of what happens in
What's going
Asia
on over
because,
there, yeah.
we're looking at billions of people.
Yeah, of
And
course.
so they're,
And truth be told, nobody really wants to spend that time going to get your head lasered because they're losing their
yes,
hair. I mean, there's great ways to spend
exactly.
time other than that. So about the PRP, because I have read that that is
Yes.
something that's up and coming and of
Well,
benefit. Do you find
PRP
that?
PRP has been around as a technique for over 25 years, if not
Mm-hmm.
more. So PRP isn't new. The implementation of PRP for skin and scalp, yes, it's newer, maybe 7, I would say 8 years, maybe at the most. But unfortunately, there were no clinical trials being done at the time. It's just a lot of dermatologists started doing it and cosmetologists started doing it and basically practicing on people. And there was a lot of damage being done with PRP, also because what you're extracting with PRP is the person's own blood. And so you can imagine, well, blood is going to have everything else that is happening in the body, right? And unfortunately, some people, to make more money, they would use kits where when you spin down the blood to try to separate the platelet rich plasma, well, what they were the code that they were getting and what they were going to inject on somebody didn't really actually have, it wasn't platelet rich plasma. It was something else or some debris.
Oh.
And so a lot of people, I had a lot of clients in the beginning who would tell me, oh, I just went to this clinic and I spent, $3,000
Mm-hmm.
on 2 or 3 PRP treatments and I don't see any new hair growth. Well, I'm looking at their scalp. I'm doing the micro tattooing, so with the needle, I can feel the scalp and I'm going like, I've done, a lot of micro needling with my micro needle and I can tell that something changed. The scalp seems to not get as red for so long. It tends to bounce back a little bit quicker. It heals quicker. It feels a little harder, so I can actually, be more precise on the work that I do, using micropigmentation with the pigment itself is not spreading out. I'm like, no, I think the PRP did do something. Maybe you didn't see the change in hair because you didn't, at the time you weren't focusing on the other factors, the hormonal, the gut, the cosmetic products, all of these other things that you have to focus on. But there were changes on scalp tissue. And the other thing is that unfortunately, a lot of people who are in business are not scientists. And so they don't use the tools to show to people when there are both microscopic and macroscopic changes. One of the things that I focus on is the psychobiology of a self image. So it has to do with how do people see themselves in the mirror and how is hair loss affecting their psyche. And what I know, the reason why I went into advocacy for prevention and for growing the trichology field is that I realized that a lot of people have unrealistic expectations. They want to have hair that they never had before. Right, so and you can look at the pictures and go like, oh, there's more hair and it's better and you can style it better. I'm like, how much more hair do you want? There's no additional hair to grow. It has gotten as thick as it's going to be. This is it. And you're already in your 60s, maybe 65, 70. You're going to enter another stage of life when we have a different type of alopecia. And so there are unrealistic expectations sometimes of what some of these techniques can do. And so that is the reason why the perception of what people see and what you can do with hairstyling is so important. The reason why we definitely need to have integrated therapies. It's not just focusing on one or focusing on the other one, but being able over time, right, to tackle all of them and learn over time what works for you, what doesn't work for somebody. And people have to be very patient. Some techniques will take 3 to 5 years for you to be able to see the change, especially if you have really long hair. Hair is only going to grow a certain amount, at most a centimeter a month, maybe less. And so if you want to have hair down to your waist, well, you're going to need to wait, right? Years, do the math. It's a lot. And so, yes, managing those expectations are some of the things that some dermatologists and hairstylists and trichologists can actually do for somebody. And you want to have that guidance, right? To not be able to waste a lot of money and
Well, of
precious
course.
time in the process.
Yes. I mean, there are traps out there for sure.
Yes.
Which kind of leads to, I guess, how we're going to round off the show today is, are we missing out a big piece of scalp health and hair health by not paying attention to the gut and to the internal functionings? And if so, what do you suggest with respect to sleep and food and all the other things that go into integrative care?
Yes, those are definitely the basics. Like I tell people, if you have been trying different shampoos and things at home for a year, 2 years, and 3 years, you're not seeing the change. And we talk about sleep. I follow some of my clients on social media and I see them sometimes at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, scrolling. Like I know what they're doing. And so focusing on those internal aspects are super important. Unfortunately, for scalp, if the connection between the gut and skin is still very early in its infancy in terms of true research of how to do the clinical trials, we do have some information. We do know that if you focus, for example, there are some studies that have come out of China using different kinds of hyaluronic acid orally. Yes, you can improve skin, and the data really is very powerful. That's supplementation, right? So that can work for some people. But if you can't afford a supplement, is that really the only way that it can be achieved? We still don't have enough information. I'm looking at least 3 years of data. It's still very new. And the connection with the scalp, I think, is going to take at least another 3 years to get there, which is the reason why I belong to some groups where we're trying to set up the right clinical trials to be able to answer these questions, especially now with the advent of artificial intelligence technologies that can help us be able to gather data, analyze data, and then be able to come up with insights a lot faster than just looking at images, and having somebody give a score. Well, we can have a machine do that and be able to really set up the clinical trials with humans and be able to go down as early as possible in life, right? Because with clinical trials, you can only really integrate subjects above a certain age, or you're looking at people between, most of the clinical trials will use people between the ages of 35 to 50, and mostly males, not females. And so we need to set up the right clinical trials to be able to answer these questions and figure out what it is that works for a woman or a teenager or a child who's a female versus a male. I think that we will need to have the separations being done clinically, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of money, which is the reason why I'm part of a nonprofit, because we have to have these mechanisms to be able to have people support all of this, right? So a lot of people pay taxes, but that's not the only way that you can actually support these efforts. I am a big proponent of people becoming citizen scientists. A lot of people don't realize the power that they have with their living conditions, with everything that they do on a daily basis, and being consumers. You're already experimenting on yourself. Well, why don't we switch then to help you and teach you how to gather data very easily? It's observations, very easy observations that then can be passed down to scientists who can analyze and use statistics to figure out, is what you're reporting global? Does this work for 30% of people, 50% of people? Can we move the needle forward by joining some of the citizen scientist efforts that are coming up right now? And it seems like we are, as a whole, many of the scientists who've been around as long as I have and longer are coming to the same realization. We need to create these networks, and we need to be able to ask and answer these questions at a global level. And the only way is by integrating a lot of people, but make the clinical trial process a lot less expensive. It is one
Well,
of the
yeah, I
major
mean,
caveats.
and it's so hard to get the right volunteers, and there's so many parameters to doing a proper clinical test.
Yes.
Observational results are quite valid.
Yes.
And when you're not dealing with an arena where you've got to be extremely careful of particular medications,
Yes.
it even makes it more valid to have observational data come in from people.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, we're coming right to the end of the show, but I do want to give you lots of space here to talk about your practice and your website.
Thank you. So I will be releasing a project of mine that I've been working on for a long time. So I bought scalpmicrobiome.com about 6 years ago. And I've been working on the background because I wanted to set it up as a educational platform for the public, and then as a networking platform for the companies that are coming up with a lot of the technologies. It's taken a long time and a lot of money to get to that point. And now we have access to scalp microbiome testing that didn't exist before. And so I will be releasing, hopefully by the beginning of next year, the platform where people will have all the content that it's been in, private vaults. It's, the kind of thing that's why you had to hunt me down, because it's not as public as it should be. So I'll be able to have that. I also wrote a fantastic book chapter on cosmetic science for health of all ages, even though it was, I started the project a year and a half ago and I finished it a year ago. It's going to be published now by December of this year. And so by the time that it gets published, I will need to rewrite it because there's additional things that will need to come into it. And so I want people to keep track of that. So scalpmicrobiome.com. You can find me on all social media platforms as Dr. Andrea Echeverry. So that's why you have to see it in writing, because it's a lot of R's.
It'll all be on the show notes, so don't worry about that.
Exactly. And if you are looking for someone, if you are struggling right now with hair loss and hair thinning and scalp issues, we do have a fantastic member directory. So these are some of the most professional trichologists. Right now, we are only 3 years old, 2 years old, going on to the third year. We have 70 members, and about 40 of those are listed in the directory. They are, localized all over the world. And if you're listening to this show and you are a practitioner of trichology or a hairstylist that this message is resonating with, we need you, we want you, and you can become part of that so that the public can actually find you and be able to grow the network as we believe that is going to be. So, I'm here for the long run with the Association of Professional Trichologists. So that would be trichology.association.org.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming to the show. So much information packed in here and a lot of new information, stuff that a lot of people really haven't heard of, I'm sure. But
Yes.
Dr. Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure having you.
Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Everybody, we'll talk to you next week on The Health Hub.
You have been listening to The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy B.Sc, here on Radio Maria Canada.